Hi everyone, welcome back to this week's video. Last week we started sowing some seeds, so we're going to have a look at them today and see what's germinated and what's not. But the main focus for this week's video is having a look at why your seeds might not be germinating. There's lots of reasons why this might be happening, and we're going to go through a few of them and see what you can do to correct that and get some germination successfully. So here we go, we've got clary sage and that has germinated within 7 days, so that is very fast at germinating. Over here we have got corn cockle seeds. These are very fast to germinate within 1 week of sowing them. No sign of our bells of Ireland germinating after 1 week, these take longer. Gypsophila has germinated within 1 week. So Gypsophila again is one that germinates very quickly for us. Here are some snapdragons. These have germinated within 1 week. They're just starting to come through now. Snapdragons like light to germinate, so I have put just a very, very thin covering of vermiculite on the top of them because they don't want to bury the seeds. You want them to be able to see the light. These Saponaria seeds have germinated within 1 week too, so are very quick to germinate from seed. 1 week on from sowing the seeds, and larkspur, there's still no sign of that. Now larkspur does take some time and it does like a period of cold before you sow it. Daucus is another slow one to germinate, so I wouldn't be expecting to see it germinating within the first week. We have to be a bit more patient with that one. 1 week on, and Acacia the Pearl, that has germinated, so that's very quick to germinate for us. Over here we've got some cornflower seedlings. These have germinated within 1 week, so cornflowers are very quick to germinate. So here's a good example from last week of sowing the little rows that we talked about so that you could separate out the different varieties. So this is 3 different types of cornflowers, but because I've got them in their little rows, I can clearly see that the one on the left is Classic Magic, the middle is Classic Fantastic, and the one on the right is Classic Romantic. And because I put them all in the same seed tray, because I knew they would germinate at similar times, they have for me, so that's grand. I'll be able to put them on at the same time and then start some new seeds in that tray. Our stalks here have germinated very quickly for us within 7 days, and these are another good example, like the cornflowers, where I have put 3 different colour varieties in one tray but separated them out so that I can see which colours are which when I pop them up. So we've got apricot on the left, purple in the middle, and we've got cherry blossom on the right. What happens if your seed tray looks like this or like this a couple of weeks on, and you would have expected to see some germination by now? You've put some seeds in that you know germinate fairly quickly and nothing's happened. What could be the cause of that? Well, let's have a look at some common reasons just now, what might have happened and what you can do to help. So the first thing that you might find is that your seeds are not germinating because the water isn't quite right in the seed tray. It might be too dry or it might be too wet. So you have to check, is your seed compost just damp or is it really too wet? Does it look waterlogged? Can you see water on the surface? Or is it the opposite? Is it too dry? When you put your fingers on the soil, does it feel bone dry? So both those things, too dry and too wet, are reasons why your seeds won't germinate. So it might have been a case that your seeds were too wet because when we talked about watering with the trays going into a bigger seed tray full of water to soak up the water, did you then lift the seed tray out to drain it? If you didn't and you kept it just in a tray of water with even just a small amount of water still in the bottom, that might be just too much. It might be waterlogging the soil, and therefore your seeds might just be rotting, or even if they're germinating they might be toppling over, damping off because the environment is just too wet. Here is a seed tray full of 1 inch of water, and before, when we were making up our seed trays, we were talking about putting our seed compost into our tray and then placing it into the larger one to soak up some water from underneath. And this is what I'm meaning just now, is maybe just getting too wet if you've kept it in the seed tray. So it's very important to lift it out and make sure that it drains after watering. Now you could have the opposite problem, whereas when you put your fingers onto the soil and feel it, it's just very dry seed compost. And this might be because you accidentally forgot to water it before you put your seeds on. It could be because you've maybe had it next to a radiator, or you've had it on a heated propagating bed or on underfloor heating, and it's just dried out completely. And because it's dried out, that means the seeds are not getting that essential water they need to break down the seed coat and for germination to happen. So if you think that your seed tray is too dry and you've already sowed your seeds, to rescue this and hope for some germination, what I would do is that you need to get some water into it. But I would do this by placing your dry seed tray into a larger tray of water so that you're watering from underneath. I wouldn't recommend watering from over at the top with a watering can, because the chances are you might wash all your nice seeds that you've sown away to the sides, and they might not germinate, or they might germinate in clumps rather than being nicely spread out. So if it's possible at all, water from underneath and then lift your seed tray up when it's nice and moist and let it drain, and that should help get germination off to a good start. So the next common problem that we've got with getting our seeds to germinate is, are they at the right temperature in the seed tray for that type of seed? So if you've read the backs of your seed packets, it will have recommended that they maybe germinate at 18 to 20 degrees Celsius, or they might have said 15 degrees Celsius, or they might have said 25 degrees Celsius. There's lots of different temperatures that seeds like to germinate at, depending on the variety. So that's the next thing to check. After you've checked the water, check the temperature. Is it right for that variety of seed? And there's a lot of things going on with temperature at this time of year. It depends where you've sown your seeds. So if you've got them sown outside in a cold greenhouse at the moment in Scotland, they probably are not going to germinate for you at the moment, because the temperatures are dipping down to freezing at night times, and we're only up to about 4 degrees or so in the daytime. So that's too cold for seeds to germinate. But you might find that it's too hot in the house for them to germinate. You've maybe got them in a very heated room in your house, or you've maybe got them on underfloor heating that is really quite warm. It's too warm for the seeds, or your heated propagating bench might have just been put up too high when you have set the temperature at the thermostat. So just check those seed labels out. Most room temperatures at home are around 18 to 20 degrees Celsius, which the majority of seeds will germinate at. So if you've got some on your windowsill and things at home, they probably are fine for temperature. But if you do, like I say, have them out in your cold greenhouse or an unheated porch at the moment, it could be a bit too cold. Or if they're really close to a source of heat like a radiator or underfloor heating, then maybe that is just a bit too hot. So you can adjust things slightly there. And some seeds need some special treatment, which I'll talk about in a minute as well. They like a period of cold before you sow the seeds to break their dormancy. They need to think it's winter time to wake the seed up, and then they will germinate well for you when you bring them into the warmth. But we'll talk about that in a minute. So what can you do to get the temperature right for your seeds? Well, if you have got them outside in Scotland in a cold unheated greenhouse at the moment, I would recommend bringing them in to a warmer environment for them. So bring them onto a heated propagating bench, bring them into a nice sunny room that gets a bit of warmth in your house. If you think that they're too hot, then lift them off that heat source. If they're on underfloor heating, lift them away from that. If they're next to a hot radiator, bring them away from that. If they're in a heated propagating bench and you think the temperature is too high, then just take it down by a degree or two. Some seeds need a little bit of help to break their dormancy to germinate. So things like bells of Ireland and larkspur actually like a period of cold before you sow the seeds. So if you have already sown your seeds, nothing's happening, it's been quite a few weeks now, then have a think, were they cold, the seeds chilled before you sowed them? And what you can do is, if you are just at this point of thinking about sowing your seeds, pop those seeds into the fridge for a couple of weeks and then sow them as normal and put them on your heated mat. But if you've already sown your seeds and you think, oh no, it's too late, I didn't chill them down, then just take them off the source of heat just now and put them in a cooler place for a couple of weeks. So that could be in a cold basement, or it could be a cold garage, or even outside if you've got a protected environment for them to stay so that they don't get disturbed by any animals and eaten. Do that for a couple of weeks and then bring them back in to your heat source where your start sowing your other seeds after that. And that hopefully will have mimicked winter enough to break that dormancy with the seed, and they'll start getting germinating for you. There are some seeds that at just this time of year, when it is early March and we've still got big fluctuating temperatures between night and day and it is still largely very cool, there's just some seeds that I wouldn't be trying to germinate at this time. Things like my zinnias, my sunflowers and my helichrysum, my statice, I would be waiting a few weeks down the line until it's more consistently warm to start those warm summer loving plants off. So another thing to check is, did you sow your seeds to the right depth? And this is quite important because it can really make a difference between germination happening and not. So some seeds you'll find that you can just pop in your seed trays, you can cover with a little bit of vermiculite and seed sowing compost and they'll be absolutely fine, they'll germinate. Other seeds though might need to be at a particular depth, they might need to be in darkness to germinate, and others might need light and be on the surface to germinate. And a good guide as to which they need is by looking at the size of your seed. So if you remember last week we snowed some snapdragon seeds, and these are absolutely tiny seeds. So anything that's really small, generally as a guide, should be planted and sowed quite close to the surface. So snapdragon seeds you would want to just press onto the surface of the seed sowing compost, or if you were going to give it a covering, just a very light covering of vermiculite on top. And that means that they don't have to work their way through all this compost to try and germinate. They've got that light and that should help them. So if you have sown some snapdragon seeds in the last couple of weeks and you've maybe put on too heavy a layer of seed sowing compost or vermiculite on top, that could be why they're not germinating for you. On the other hand, some seeds like to have darkness to germinate, and generally these are your larger seeds as well. So quite often a guide is that you should be planting your seed about 2 to 3 times the depth of the seed. So these larger seeds, like corn cockles, they're quite sizable seeds. They can have a good covering of your seed compost on top. Things like sweet peas as well, they don't need to be on the surface. You can put a layer of seed compost on top of them as well. There are larger seeds. So just check back, have a look at that and see whether you've got your depth right. Your seed packets should talk about that as well. They quite often say cover with 1/4 millimetre of soil, or they might say bury the seed to a depth of 1/2 inch. Just check your seed packets and make sure you've got that bit right. So another problem you might have had is with your compost. Maybe the seeds are just not germinating because they're not able to get through the type of compost that you put in your seed tray. And this is where it's important to make sure that you're using seed sowing compost. And I'm going to show you the difference between multi-purpose here and specific seed sowing compost. And you can see why some of your seeds might struggle to germinate if they were in the multi-purpose. So here we've got some seed sowing compost, and you can see here that it is very fine in texture. There is no big lumps in it. It's the perfect medium for sowing your seeds into. They're not going to have any problems in getting through that when they're germinating and growing into little seedlings. Over here is a bag of multi-purpose compost that I have got, and it's a bit of a mixture really. You've got some finer areas, but you can see here that there's some larger twiggy bits, some lumpy bits, hard lumpy bits. And if you had sown your seeds into this multi-purpose compost, you can see that if it had some of these on top of it, it would really struggle to break through these and grow up as little seedlings through it. So there is a big difference between multi-purpose and seed compost, and go for the seed compost when sowing your seeds for maximum germination. So another reason that your seeds can fail to germinate is because the quality of the seed wasn't very good. And this could be for a number of reasons. It could be because of how you've stored them at home. So seeds like to be in a nice dry place, and they need to be in a cool place. So if you've kept them in a very warm or damp environment, then that means that the seeds may not germinate for you. They'll have lost their viability. So have a check about where you were storing those seeds before you sowed them. The other thing to do is have a look at your seed packets. So seed packets should have on them a use by date. So this one here is Larkspur, and it's saying use it by 2024 in October. So It's not a set thing, so they have put the use by dates on these seed packets, and it's not to say that you wouldn't get some germination after this date. You might, but the germination rates wouldn't be as high. So as the months and years go by past the use by date, then your chances of germination is becoming less and less. So if you're wanting good germination rates, then it's always best to use fresh seed, or seed that's within the date on the seed packet. So I bought this seed this year and the date is October 2024 on it. So I know that it's 2022 now. That means that I've got a couple of years where this should still be viable and give me good germination rates. But I do know that I need to store it properly for that to happen. So it needs to go in my box in a cool, dry place to store and keep it in those ideal conditions. Same as if you have saved your own seed from the garden. So I do every autumn when my flowers are starting to come to an end. I then collect seed on nice dry days, and I would have to keep that in good storage as well. So I keep it in its paper bags in boxes in a cool dry place to store it. They are very fresh seed. I know that that has been from last season, so it should germinate really well for me. And I also, if I have any old packets of seeds, I'll update them and get some new packets of seeds if they're just so far past their sell by date. So this time of year, it's worth going through your boxes of seeds that you've saved from last year, check all the dates on them. If any are past their use by date, you can choose whether or not to just have a shot and see what germinates for you, or go in and buy better fresh seed for higher germination rates. So another thing that can have lots of problems for sowing your seeds is if animals or birds get to them before they've germinated. And this is sometimes more of a problem when you direct sow outside. At this time of year, we're doing all our sowing inside while the soil's not that warm. But birds and animals, mice and things, they can go for these things outside. But that's not to say that you're completely safe in the greenhouse either. In your kitchens and things, you're probably fine. But if you're sowing anything like me outside in a greenhouse or a conservatory in these heated propagating benches, you can still get slugs and snails in here. You can get mice. So if nothing's happening with your seeds and they're not germinating, just have a check for the telltale signs. So things like slugs and snail trails, you'll see them in your greenhouse conservatory. That might be a sign that they have been in. Also, just check that there's not been anything that looks like your seed trays have been dug in a bit. Maybe a mice has got in, and that can sometimes mean that you lose your seeds that way too. Another problem that you have is that your seeds might have something that's called damping off when they germinate. So they might literally have just germinated for you, which is great, but then you lose them very quickly to a process called dampening off, where fungi has affected the seedling and they just keel over. So you might see some fuzzy mold on your trays, you might see little seedlings that have just keeled over and become very weak, and you can't get them back from that. And this is quite common at this time of year when it is very cold and damp, and we're sowing seeds at the very beginning of the season when we haven't got that warm, dry atmosphere. So what you're doing is you're sowing your seeds, they're germinating on their heat pads, but then after that, then they are getting this cool, damp air to grow on, and that can sometimes lead to this dampening off. So what can you do? Well, the main thing to do is to make sure you've got good ventilation. So as soon as your seeds have germinated, you want to take off the domes that you had on top of them, because this was only on to provide a warm, humid atmosphere for germination. If you keep it on after that, that's not allowing enough light and ventilation to get to your little seedlings, and then that can be a reason that they can cause this dampening off with them. Make sure that they're in a cool atmosphere to grow on so that they don't grow too leggy, but make sure that there's ventilation. So if it's a nice day outside, it's not too windy or stormy, get the greenhouse doors open, get some air circulating through, and that can help with dampening off as well. Sometimes it's just a waiting game. If you have looked at all the different things that we've talked about today as to why your seeds haven't germinated and you're doing everything right, then sometimes it's just a case of waiting a bit longer. They have lots of recommendations for germination times on your seed packets, but it's not a hard and fast rule. There's lots of environmental factors, and sometimes your seeds just need that little bit longer. And I know that seeds for me, like Bells of Ireland and Larkspur and Astrantia, these are the ones that I find tricky to germinate. And sometimes when I've just been giving up and I've taken the seed trays out and I've put them outside and forgotten about them for a while, that's when the seeds suddenly start germinating for me. So it's worth sometimes just having a little bit of patience, waiting that little bit longer and seeing if they'll come through for you. So next week we will have a look at these seedlings and see how they're getting on. If they're getting to the stage of getting a pair of true leaves on them, we'll get them potted on, and I'll show you how to do this. And also we'll have a look at leggy seedlings. If yours have just stretched towards the sky, not getting enough light, is there any way to save them? So we'll have a look at that. And in the last couple of days I've been starting to harden off my plants as well that I overwintered, so I can get them out into the garden in the coming weeks. And if you want to find out more about how to harden off your plants and get them used to the outdoors, then check out my video from last year about hardening off your seedlings, and I'll leave a link to that at the end of this video in a second. So see you next week.